The middle class in the United States, they're going to get screwed.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm really glad to have you back. And in the interest of documenting the collapse, as you know we like to do with Bill Holter, Andy Hoffman, Rob Kirby, and so many others, I have on Jason Burack from Wall Street from Main Street. You can find him at wallstreetfrommainstreet.com and at the YouTube channel by the same name. So please go there and subscribe now. Jason, it's great to have you.
Thanks. This is my first time on. I've listened to the program for years. I'm glad to be a guest.
Oh, and I listen to yours too. We post all of your podcasts, all of your interviews over at SGT Report, and we appreciate the work you're doing. You strike me as a very educated, level-headed guy who provides a lot of great insights in your interviews. You're not just an interviewer, you're a contributor to really the documentation of the collapse. And I wanted to kick things off today by asking you about a piece of news that I find absolutely hilarious in its criminality, and it's this piece. Larry Summers launches the war on paper money, and of course he's following up news we heard about this past weekend that they want to ban the $500 euro note, and Larry wants to kill the $100 bill. Can you even believe these criminals, man? These guys will stop at nothing, and now they're coming after our cash.
Doesn't Larry Summers seem like a James Bond villain to you? I mean, all he needs is, an eye patch and a white cat to stroke, right? So
Yeah, he does.
him and Keynes are up there, with their deviousness. They seem like James Bond villains for just, how nefarious and all these, bright ideas in air quotes that come up. But yeah, I mean, all these cash ideas, and we have central banks talking about going to digital currency so they can track every single transaction. All these things, whether they're bail-ins, bailouts, cashless society, quantitative easing, all these different things the schemes that the government can come up with, whether they're covert or overt, these are all symptoms of a totalitarian government. So it's going to be very confusing to many people. Like, why did they go from bailouts to bail-ins? Why are they going to switch and do both? And these news stories that are just added, none of these things surprise me anymore. If you go back and read Keynesian economics, if you look at some of the goals of these central planners for decades now, this is what they want. This is how they get control. They just confuse you. They make a lot of the average person on Main Street not understand what's going on, so they defer to the experts and they think, oh, the experts have our best interest at heart, when that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, well, not only could it not be further from the truth, these guys are all part of the good old boys club. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Larry Summers the Treasury Secretary under Clinton?
He was the assistant. Robert Rubin, the guy from Goldman Sachs,
was
right. He was the assistant. So him and Tim Geithner, they were, Larry Summers was, the main academic guy from Harvard, former Harvard University president. So he was the one writing the academic papers with Gibson's paradox and how if they control the gold price, they can manipulate interest rates however they want. So he was the one that was giving Robert Rubin the ammunition he needed to go out and go sell the gold on leases and swaps, and Greenspan and those guys to go and do that so the U.S. could bring in extra cash.
Well, I love it when they talk about banning cash. These criminals will always say it's under the guise of preventing terrorism, curbing corruption, never ever mentioning the fact that the core corruption comes from the central banks and the international criminal banks, the banks that launder the drug money themselves. And one of the things in this article that I think needs to be expressed here to the audience, Jason, is that out of all of the trillions of dollars, quote unquote, that have been printed into thin air by the central bank, there's only about 1.4 trillion in actual cash currency in circulation. And this article notes that if Larry got his way, by banning the $100 bill, they would take approximately $1.1 trillion, or 78% of all of the currency out of circulation. And what a terrific way then to be able to induce their negative interest rate plan, because there would be no escape. I guess the only escape at this point then would be for people to turn directly to gold.
Yeah, and on top of that, in addition, they could track every single transaction. They could tax every single transaction. And the other thing I've talked about, and I haven't heard this mentioned a lot, is you go back and look at what was done to Julian Assange and what was done to Edward Snowden. If you're a big rebel rouser, if you have a large audience and you're pissing off governments too much, or you're pissing off the banks or something like that, and the whole system is digital, right? They just turn off your credit cards. They just turn off your PayPal account. They just turn off your checking and savings accounts, which are digital, right? And how are you supposed to buy groceries? How are you supposed to make a living then? So, I mean, this is the type of thing that they have set up. And they've done this to, with a few select people here, there. They haven't done this on a large scale yet, but that doesn't mean that won't happen in the future either. No. And I think, precious metals are going to play a select way. But people have to be careful about that because, the government can change the rules. We don't know what they're going to do going forward, whether it's a windfall profits tax on gold, gold confiscation, or any of those things. So people cannot go all in on any one precious metal. They can't put all their money in gold. They can't put all their money in silver. They can't trust any one country anymore. This is just the world we live in now. This is, unfortunately, this dystopian new normal.
Yeah, it's the totalitarian tiptoe, and you're right, because here in this article, too, it mentions gold. It says, that said, it would leave gold as an alternative to the collapsing monetary system, but by then there will surely be a redo of Executive Order 6102, banning the possession of physical gold and demanding its return to the U.S. government. Because, of course, Jason, there's nothing beyond the pale for these criminals. They're willing to do anything. We don't have to get into the Scalia death, that the mysterious nature of the Scalia death here just recently, where the coroner declared him deceased over the phone, which I think is illegal, and did not then suggest an autopsy, saying that it was natural causes without even seeing the body. The insanity that we're living through right now is almost hard to describe, and it's certainly hard to keep up with. And one other thing, you mentioned this idea of, oh, they'll just turn off your chip in the future. They'll just turn off your card. They'll turn off your access to the banks once they go cashless. You know who predicted that so beautifully was Aaron Russo in his interview with Alex Jones, and of course his great film From Freedom to Fascism. Aaron Russo was friends with Nick Rockefeller, who reportedly said, this is our plan. We want everybody on a chip. We'll control the money. We'll control your accounts. If we don't like your politics, we'll turn off your chip.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is the way things are going. And, you brought up the Scalia. I mean, this is just the way the mainstream media rolls right now and the government rolls. I mean, look what happened with bin Laden. Like, he was supposedly the number one enemy to the United States, and, his body was buried at sea. We didn't get the full truth on that story. I mean, I'm a history buff. History was one of my majors in college. We could go back and talk about, the JFK assassination and how we weren't told the truth on that. Martin Luther King. We could go back on so many different instances where the government put out a certain narrative. And, here it is. We're not going to dispute it anymore. That's it. And then the alternative, there wasn't really a lot of alternative media back then for a lot of those, but now there is. So it's just amazing that, things are changing so rapidly in the global economy, but the mainstream media is fighting it. Government is fighting it. And, they haven't penalized people yet, the rebel rousers quite yet, but they've set it up now, like you said. That's a great documentary with Aaron Russo. I encourage your listeners, if they haven't seen it, it is an oldie, but it's a classic.
Yeah, From Freedom to Fascism. Of course, that's all about the IRS, but then his interview that he did with Alex Jones, in which he revealed the nature of his relationship with Nick Rockefeller, is an absolute must-watch. He really predicted all of the things that we're seeing now unfold, and unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Cancer took him far too quickly right after that interview, in fact, and he'll be missed, because the truth tellers are the ones that don't get to seem to live forever. Like Henry Kissinger, that guy will live forever. David Rockefeller, these guys just seem to live forever. It reminds me of the old Bill Hicks joke. Why does it seem like the demons get to live forever? The demons run amok while the truth tellers die young.
Maybe it's because they have access to the advanced medical technology and 3D printing stuff. Maybe they're having their organs replaced already through 3D printing and things like that. I honestly don't know. I mean, maybe, it's just tougher to make a living telling the truth right now. Our views and our my presence on Twitter and social media, I just noticed, compared to some other people that aren't telling the truth, it's just a lot lower. I think Twitter and some of these other programs go out of their way to not promote people like you and me as much.
Well, you may be right about the social media. The other thing you may be right about is the advanced technologies. We know that Dick Cheney actually was living with a heart beating outside of his chest. I mean, the man was literally on life support, wheeled around in a wheelchair for the better part of a couple of years. I don't know if they've remedied that yet by putting an active heart back in the guy, but you want to talk about Bond villains. Dick Cheney rolling around with a heart machine beating outside of his body.
Yeah, Dick Cheney is like on a they made that episode on South Park where Dick Cheney was the devil, and there was a separate show. That was just I remember that when I was in college. That was just one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I mean, so many of these guys, it's like what Doug Casey says, I guess the qualification in order to rise up in the political ranks or to rise up to the top, to be an academic advisor, you basically have to be a psychopath. I mean, Paul Krugman, Piketty, a lot of these guys. Piketty wrote a new book. It was like a bestseller. It's a boring Marxist neo-Keynesian book talking about how all these governments of the world need to unite to protect anyone from dodging taxes, and governments need to combine for a one world government to enforce a global wealth tax. So I mean, these guys, a lot of them, their stuff just keeps on getting more and more radical. It's almost as if ideologically were in the 20s and 30s with, the Marxists and neo-Keynesians and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's scary times. And why don't we talk a little bit about derivatives and the collapse? Again, we say that we're documenting the collapse. I did it most recently, very quantifiably with Bill Holter, citing some specific news items. And I want to ask you, first of all, about derivatives and Deutsche Bank, if you want to go there. But secondly, are you surprised that the collapse we have been documenting hasn't occurred to the degree where there's been a total meltdown? Are you surprised that they've been able to stitch it together for so long? And how have they stitched it together this long, Jason?
I was initially surprised that they've been able to keep this long. When I started to wake up in 2008 and learn and read and interview people and gain knowledge, I had been in the financial industry before and I didn't really understand exactly what was going on. Then the 2008 collapse happened and I wanted answers that the people in the mainstream financial media and the mainstream financial industry couldn't give me. The more I've learned about the system, the more I'm not surprised that they've been able to keep things going with with patchwork schemes. I heard behind the scenes in 2014, one of my sources here in DC, a friend of mine, a small little money manager, he just so happened to be able to sneak into an IMF conference in DC. And these were all the major economies were there, pretty much all representatives, at least one representative from all the major central banks, all the major treasury departments. And he took notes there. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he did it anyway. And I'm thankful I was able to, to tell part of his story. I didn't use his name. But one of the major takeaways he said was, the people at this IMF conference with the central bankers there, with the treasury departments, was that they knew the system was going to collapse at some point, and they were just trying to delay it as long as possible and work on the next system. And the major thing they were using was the currency swaps. So they were printing, hundreds of billions, if not trillions with each other as much and not reporting it. So I think that patchwork scheme, it's been able to buy them time for just a couple of years to keep the asset markets higher. But in terms of the derivatives and Deutsche Bank and Glencore and things like that, I think the major thing is the oil price and the base metals to a lesser extent. The oil market is the largest productive industry that we have. It's larger than healthcare. So oil and energy is the largest productive world economic industry we have. That industry has used a massive amount of debt. We now have a situation, Sean, where around 90% of all the world's global oil supply is completely and totally deeply in the red and totally uneconomic. And we have a perverse situation where a lot of these oil producing countries are basically bankrupt. They're trying to fight off insolvency. We all have a lot of shale producers who are insolvent and the banks aren't calling in their loans because they're worried about contagion and counterparty risk and collapse. So we have a situation where the companies are trying to pump more just to get a little bit more revenue, and the banks, if they're a private company, are giving them just a little bit more debt to buy themselves another couple months, maybe 6 months, when they already have mountains of debt, hoping that the oil price reverses and turns its course. But we're in a situation now where I think it's almost like the 1980s. And for your listeners who are not familiar, during the 1980s, there was 19 countries that went bankrupt with oil debt. 19 oil-producing countries went bankrupt, including the Soviet Union basically went bankrupt in the early 90s, but a lot of that was from the oil debt that they took on at a higher oil price in the 70s. So we're in a situation now where that could be repeating with a lot of oil-producing countries, on the verge of bankruptcy. The shale producers are basically insolvent now. I've seen different estimates from 30 to 50% of all shale producers in the United States are totally insolvent. And the banks haven't called on their loans. So we're in a situation where the oil production is still high. It shouldn't be, but that's because the bankers, the Wall Street people, are trying to delay any collapse and any trigger points that could delay. And the oil market is a very large domino. The last couple of years, we were in a situation, to use Doug Casey's analogy, where we were in the eye of the hurricane. They lied to people about a recovery. They kept the asset markets high with currency swaps and other printed money programs and other BS economic data. And now we're in a situation where we're on the other side. We're past the eye of the hurricane. And now we're getting to dominoes where the oil market could trigger major collapses with the banks. And then after those dominoes with the oil market, base metals, and the banks, we have the developing countries with mass amounts of debt too, that they've leveraged their economies to China. So the market isn't even talking about the loans from the developing countries that are going to default on in the next couple of years as well. And we're seeing, signs of this with the commodity currencies, the countries with the large sovereign wealth funds. They're dumping massive amounts of equities, and you can look this up. There's a lot of stories on this. and even Norway's doing it, which is, considered one of the more efficiently run countries. They're dumping mass amounts of shares to bring cash home, to protect their own currency, to protect their own governments, to protect their own countries in case of civil unrest and things like that. So the asset markets, it looks like they're being, the stock market at least, is going to be sacrificed in favor of countries protecting their own economies.
All right. Well, you've just described financial Armageddon, and when we document the collapse, we want quantifiables. And like I said at the beginning of the interview, you're a knowledgeable guy who brings a lot to the table in your own interviews, and I've always appreciated that about your style. Let me ask you about the price of oil. Then, how low can it go? How low can it go? We've been hearing about this deflationary collapse. I always wondered what that meant. We're seeing it now play out, certainly as it relates to the energy sector, commodities, oil. How low can oil go, Jason? I mean, it was just recently that Zero Hedge reported what crisis is the gold-oil ratio predicting this time, and it says the number of barrels of oil that a single ounce of gold can buy has never, ever been higher. What do you make of that article, and so how low can oil go?
Well, here's the first things first. You mentioned deflationary collapse. The people on Main Street, unfortunately, are not going to see a lot of the real benefits of deflation, other than cheap gasoline and cheaper asset prices if they have cash. The people on Main Street the middle class in the United States, they're going to get screwed. They're going to see higher taxes layered on with this deflation in air quotes. They're going to see taxes layered on in healthcare and so many property taxes and so many other things, and their bills are going to go up. But with that being said, the paper oil market, Sean, it can go a lot lower. Because the trend traders, the people trading the charts, these computer algorithms are in power right now. So really the only thing that's going to drive the oil market higher for a price rebound is if we see massive amounts of bankruptcies in the oil producers, the shale producers, and that a lot of supply comes offline, or we start to see governments start to go bankrupt, or we see what's left of OPEC or a new oil cartel that forms out of OPEC's ashes actually announce and do a large oil production cut. That's the only three things, in my opinion, that could save the oil price from starting to go high, stopping to go lower. In terms of oil being priced in gold, I think oil and gold. I'm a contrarian value investor. I don't think if you buy oil companies with good balance sheets that don't have a lot of debt, I think a couple years from now, you're going to be extremely happy. And I think, accumulating physical precious metals, physical gold and silver, and also buying the gold and silver companies, because I think basically we're in the process of bottoming in gold and silver in US dollar terms. I think if you buy companies with good balance sheets there, I think you're in a good position if you diversify out of just adding physical precious metals. So, with the paper markets, the way they are, Sean, with manipulation, there's a lot of paper barrels of oil out there right now. It's not nearly as bad as paper gold or paper silver, but it's at least like 50 or 60 times as much paper oil as there is to actual barrels of oil. So that's what's pushing the market down right now. And this is going to have real world consequences, just like it is for physical gold and silver supply down the line as well.
All right. Well, that's interesting to hear you talk about the paper oil that's out there. How about the paper gold and the paper silver? What's going on at the COMEX? How important is it in your eyes? And how important was that January 28th silver fix break at the LBMA, which for the first time in documented history, as far as I know, was the first time that the market said, we're not going to abide by your cartel price fix?
Well, I'm actually really glad that some of the primary gold and silver miners are starting to publicly voice their displeasure with, the paper gold and silver price. We've had Keith Neumeyer. He's one of the champions who's been willing to go on the record and speak about the manipulation. But really, other than him, off the record, some of these mining company executives over a beer at a mining conference or, off the record, after we're not recording on a podcast, they'll say, yeah, gold and silver are manipulated, but I can't really do that much about it. I can't talk about it. I have debt to the bank companies and I don't want them, threatening me or anything like that. So a lot of these mining companies, they used way too much debt. And when the metals prices were higher, they brought on a lot of higher cost mines and they used debt to do it. And once you take on a lot of debt, you're beholden to the banks. So I'm just glad that there's been some outrage, whether it's KGHM who's done it or some of the others. Hopefully there'll be a lot more miners that come out and say it. They're fed up with these paper metals prices. They look at the physical supply demand of the market and say, the paper price can't continue to go down when the supply demand fundamentals say the paper price should not be going down. This is just ridiculous. I would like more miners to, grow a pair, take a stand, and come out and say that. But the ones that have debt on their balance sheet, Sean, they're not willing to do it. They're too scared of the banks right now.
All right, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you again, just specifically about Deutsche Bank. Do you think the problems at Deutsche Bank with their derivatives book, what 55 trillion, according to Bill Holter, maybe closer to 75 trillion dollars? Do you think Deutsche Bank may be the nexus point for collapse? Do you think their problems are so big that they just can't be solved, even with bail-ins?
Basically, yeah. I mean, the Deutsche Bank has been a problem. Everyone's known about Deutsche Bank being a problem for a long time. I've spoke with Dave Kranzler about this. Even when he was trading at Bankers Trust, I think he worked there about 10, 15 years ago. He knew about the problems we're developing there. So, I mean, a lot of people on Wall Street have known about these problems developing and growing for a long time. But what has happened really after the 2008 crash, a lot of money through like American subsidiaries of some of these European banks, they were getting backdoor money from the Fed, backdoor bailouts and things like that. So they were buying time. Now, all the problems weren't solved, but they were getting some temporary solutions. But I mean, the problems just continue to grow. And the European banks, whether it's Deutsche Bank or some of the others, and Deutsche Bank's probably the largest one, no one knows if they're going to be nationalized, if they're going to, create a new bank and put the bad assets in there. But the bottom line is this derivatives market is just out of whack right now. So even if Deutsche Bank survives, there's so many banks out there that have not written off their loans yet for the oil and energy markets. And that's not even considering, what's going to happen with the emerging market debt after that. So there is so much loans out there that even if Deutsche Bank survives, that there's something other, another collapse or trigger point that's going to bring it down. So they could spend an enormous effort saving Deutsche Bank, but I don't think it's going to matter. Maybe it'll delay things a little bit. But I mean, we're in a situation here now where the Japanese government, they try to devalue the yen and it doesn't devalue. And I think Japan's basically saving the U.S. bond market. It's been buying the U.S. bond market time by buying treasuries, trying to devalue their own currency. So we have a situation here now where bankrupt governments are secretly trying to bail out bankrupt governments, and they're trying to save their banks. They're working behind the scenes. This is not a situation, and a lot of people who are not aware of this, is that governments are speaking with other governments. There's enormous coordination behind the scenes, and you're not going to hear that on the mainstream media. You'll be called a conspiracy theorist, but that's a fact. So whether it's Bank of International Settlement meetings or IMF meetings or, central bankers meetings, all these guys are discussing things like, oh, how can we buy some more time? How do we set up the next system? How do we prevent, contagion and panic? They're working on secretive plans behind the scenes. I think that's something your listeners need to understand, is that, the sovereignty of a lot of these countries is in question because, countries like Japan are willing to do whatever it takes to try to buy the U.S. bond market more time.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of Japan, it's Andy Hoffman who's told us repeatedly that he thinks Japan will be the first world nation, the first Western first world nation to experience hyperinflation of the currency, and it can't be stopped. Of course, the same thing has been said, that it can't be stopped here with the dollar, hyperinflation of the dollar. Let me ask you about hyperinflation of the dollar and currencies. What do you see coming? You talk about these guys colluding in the background, trying to stitch this thing together and trying to roll out another system. How much of this do you think was done by design? I mean, again, I always bring up that Economist magazine from 1988, the cover with the phoenix rising from the burning ashes of fiat dollars there with a medallion around its neck, a gold medallion saying 2018, get ready for a world currency. How much of this is by design, and the death of the dollar looks like it's right on track for 2018?
A lot of this was done by design. Most of the stuff that's been implemented now for decades is based on the theories of Keynes and Marx and neo-Keynesians and neo-Marxists, and weaving into our culture and our economic ideologies and what's taught at business schools and in textbooks and by the mainstream financial media. So, I mean, Keynes was in favor of a one world currency. He wanted the bank corp, and he wanted, to tax people who saved. They were the evil savers, the evil greedy savers who prevented the workers' wages from going higher and prevented the economy from growing. He called savings the paradox of thrift, but he also talked about a huge savings glut, and that's something he got from Marx. So this is a situation now where everyone's purchasing power is basically being stolen. The government statistics are all, lying and hiding this. I think the goal has been just to milk everyone slowly, steal things from everyone slowly in terms of purchasing power. And this is why I think it's dangerous as an Austrian school economist, someone who looks at a free market, looks for government interventions and manipulations. This is something that's dangerous when people say deflation, right? Because yes, GDP is down, but that's a government manipulated statistic there. the people on Main Street, the middle class, the people with savings who still have any savings left, if they have any at all, they're not going to see any increased purchasing power in most of their everyday lives. Their bills are going to go up. They're going to be paying more taxes. They're not going to see any beneficial deflation, because deflation is a decrease, according to the Austrian school, it's a decrease in the money supply, which leads to increased purchasing power. And people are really not going to be seeing that. I mean, when you go to the grocery store, other than, like I said, at maybe the buying electronics or gasoline, or buying cheap asset prices when the stock market does crash. And I think it'll be a minor miracle if they're able to prop up the markets before the November 2016 election. I don't think they'll be able to keep the markets up before prior to the election happening. But it'll be a minor miracle if it does. So I think that the world we're living in now, there's an enormous amount of misperception and lies. And people are going to have to, just be able to diversify and educate themselves. So the best thing people can do is look at their channel, go to your channel, go to my channel, learn new things and educate themselves, and don't trust anyone completely anymore. This is the world we live in now.
Yeah, and you need to be careful where you're getting your information from, guys. Share this with your friends and family. This is the most important takeaway. I was watching Bill Maher's show on HBO the other day. Sometimes I just like to see what that guy's up to, and he was quoting the right's hate for Obama and citing the wonderful economy, and he specifically cited 4.9% unemployment as being a beacon of Obama's success. And he said it with a straight face. And he said the only conclusion he can have for the people's hatred of Obama is, of course, Obama's race. They always play the race card. And he actually said with a straight face that the economy is proof that Obama has done a wonderful job. But you just cited the government fudged statistics, as we do too, as does John Williams over at Shadow Stats. And the unemployment rate in this country is nowhere near 4.9%. And I would have to believe that somebody as educated as Bill Maher knows that.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's part of the Hollywood limousine liberals, right? So, I mean, he's always going to vote Democrat. Maybe he'll vote his radical view for changing, not voting for Hillary, will be voting for Bernie Sanders instead. Yeah. So, I mean, Hollywood's just part of the propaganda machine for the most part. If you're an independent thinker in Hollywood, like a Vince Vaughn, a libertarian, I mean, you're risking your whole career. You're risking not getting any more work. So that's just the way things are right now. But I mean, like, look at the labor participation rate. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and I have a lot of friends who graduated college, and, a lot of them are barely getting by with 2 degrees. They're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. And I live in one of the richest average median family incomes. 3 out of the 5 richest average median family incomes in the United States are in the D.C. metro area. And yet, at the cell phone stores here, they're having people no money down to get an iPhone. So, I mean, because people can't afford the cash to get an iPhone. So, I mean, it just shows that things are incredibly, totally misleading. So, yes, maybe a lot of people are working part-time jobs, and that's like how they come up with the phony unemployment numbers. But the labor participation rate and the amount of part-time jobs in the system are saying that that's a lie.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Vince Vaughn and people risking really everything to speak truth, really, because at this point, anybody resisting the government, speaking out, calling the government liars, the liars that they are, pointing a finger at the government and saying, hey, you guys are misleading us. Anybody doing that is risking everything. And this is a tough environment for truth tellers. I'm going to be interviewing Professor James Tracy in the very near future. And there's another man who's paid a heavy price for speaking truth. It just seems that the winds of tyranny are really whipping up, just as Aaron Russo predicted. And our guest has been Jason Burack. Jason, I really do appreciate your voice and your intellect. Thanks so much for your time. And tell everybody about your YouTube channel. We need people to subscribe to your channel because it's a great channel.
Yeah, and we also have a free report your listeners can go get if they it's a 2015 review, 2016 preview. If they go to the Wall Street for Main Street website too, that's WLLSTFRMAINST.com. They give us an email address, they'll get the report for free. It's got some interesting stock picks in there, some good gold and silver stocks with good balance sheets. They're actually up quite a bit in 2016. So that report's free. It's like 25 pages. It's got some in-depth analysis of the different markets in the economy. And our Wall Street for Main Street YouTube channel is finally over 1 million views. And that's just all one word, Wall Street for Main Street. The street is abbreviated.
Well, I will put that right up on screen so people can see it. Yeah, guys, check out wallstreetformainstreet.com and do subscribe to the YouTube channel of the same name. Again, our guest has been Jason Burack from Wall Street for Main Street. Jason, thanks so much. And guys, thank you for your support at sgtreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com. Real news 24/7. Have a terrific weekend ahead.